Independent thoughts, independent life. This is Chad Benson.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins. I am thrilled to be hanging out with you today and thrilled to be pretty close to celebrating the 4th of July. If you've been watching any, I do mean any of the talking heads that are on the network news stations, you know that President Trump will be going to Mount Rushmore for a 4th of July celebration. Fireworks are going to be fired off. A lot of excitement there. A bunch of people in the stands. About 7,500 seats, I think, will be available. And then there's probably going to be a lot of other people watching all throughout South Dakota. And yet there's debate, a lot of debate going on as to whether or not this is, of course, the right thing to do during a pandemic. And then, surprisingly, whether or not Mount Rushmore is, quote, problematic. And I am serious about that. I saw on Fox and Friends this morning that the South Dakota AG, Jason Ravnsborg, was talking about his excitement, first and foremost, in having the president go to South Dakota for a fireworks celebration on the 4th of July or just before the 4th of July out at Mount Rushmore. That is his take, not the take of some, but let's hear from him.
Well, I think everybody's very excited that we're having fireworks again. I mean, I think, like you said, we haven't had fireworks in 10 years. I think it's looking like a great day. And, you know, anytime the President of the United States comes to our state, I think we're honored. I think the President's policies line up very well with South Dakota of low taxes, pro-military, and appreciation for law enforcement.
Yep, a lot of those things are absolutely true. Now, the second question that comes here is one that I know that even the person asking the question finds surprising, and I find surprising. But here are some of the, quote, problems with Mount Rushmore. The first one, the presidents that are displayed on it, apparently they may to some be a huge symbol of white supremacy. I am serious. Here's how the AG responded to that question.
Well, I guess I completely disagree. Each of the presidents were picked for a specific reason. President Washington for obviously the birth of our nation. President Jefferson for the growth of our nation. President Lincoln for the development of our nation. And Teddy Roosevelt for the preservation of our nation. This is a symbol of American exceptionalism. And I believe that there's no way a symbol of white supremacy.
Now, of course, the biggest question that everybody asks, or at least a lot of people have been asking, is Mount Rushmore is built on problematic land. Again, I'm so... you know what? Here, let me just let Fox and Friends handle this one.
Last president that was there was Bush 41, also a combat veteran like you. And some people are looking at these presidents and saying, well, America stole this land from the Indians and then put their presidents in the mountain. How dare they?
Well, that obviously has been a dispute over the years since the time about 1876, but that case has actually been litigated to the United States Supreme Court. We're sympathetic to their feelings on the issue, but I do believe that it was not meant to desecrate the land, but to honor America and honor our state of South Dakota.
Mount Rushmore, 4 presidents of our country, honored for a very long time in a part of a mountain. And yet a lot of people are saying that this is very problematic, that the president, of course, should not be going to South Dakota at all and having any kind of fireworks display, and that we need to tear Mount Rushmore down. I fail to understand a lot of the calls to action here and how they actually fix what might be the original problem. The original problem, the first discussion taking place, was systematic racism, systematic oppression, and problems with law enforcement officials interacting at times with certain members of certain communities, certainly black men being at the forefront of those conversations. And that has dovetailed into a bunch of brands changing their names, a bunch of brands changing their imaging. The Redskins now can't sell any products on some websites, and FedEx is begging them to change the name of their football team. That is absolutely true. FedEx has requested, they own the rights to the stadium, by the way, that the Washington Redskins change the name of their team. And then I don't know why this happened, but several of the items that would be available for Redskins for sale on Nike's website were pulled. All their merchandise is pulled off. If you search the Redskins team right now on Nike, no items available. So the push is going to continue until maybe that is changed and happens. And then I also saw this, if we're talking about the NFL for just a second, and a lot of the conversations going on as far as race relations, for lack of any other better term, the NFL will play Black National Anthem, that's in quotes, before each Week 1 game. This song, which I guess has long been thought of to be the black national anthem, called Lift Every Voice and Sing, will be played before the national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner. And my biggest question when I see this headline and some of the reactions to it is I didn't know we had multiple national anthems. I didn't know that we needed multiple national anthems. And to even have that be a thing, doesn't that separate us more? Doesn't doing something like this continue to divide us? There are so many situations in which you would think that for the betterment of all of society, every individual in every group, what have you, we would have uniform things that all of us can turn to and all of us can honor. And so then to have separate things, to have a second national anthem that is felt to better represent any part of our society is division. That there's no other term for that. That is separation in a way that is very confusing to me. Now, granted, if this is something that makes people feel heard, I don't know that I guess I have a huge problem with it, as long as, of course, the national anthem is also played. But if we continue down that path, the path of, well, this, is really what this community needs and what this community needs, then all we're doing is acknowledging the fact that we can't do things together, that we can't find a way to all have common ground and come to the same table and respect the same things. It makes no sense. Mount Rushmore is a problem to a lot of people, and so they need it to be changed. And yet, as you just heard from the AG, his feeling on it is that this thing put into part of the mountain there is not desecrating land. I want to play that part of the conversation again. This is from Fox News. This is South Dakota AG Jason Ravnsborg, because I think it's tremendously important, no matter what other conversations take place, to realize what that is a symbol of. And it's not a symbol of white supremacy or of taking land from any community.
Well, that obviously has been a dispute over the years since the time about 1876, but that case has actually been litigated to the United States Supreme Court. We're sympathetic to their feelings on the issue, but I do believe that it was not meant to desecrate the land, but to honor America and honor our state of South Dakota.
What I think is so important about that statement is the second half of it. We will respect any opinions, any feelings, anything that people, any reactions, I guess, that people would have. But at the same time, we have to tell you what we think, too. And that's part of the problem, is that any time right now you disagree on any of these conversations, you look at someone and say, you know what, actually, that might not be something that's as problematic as you think it is. You're looked at as if you're all of a sudden the devil. You cannot disagree. You cannot turn to someone. I mean, we can, and we do, but certain subsets of people right now that have these strong opinions are saying things to you like, well, if you disagree with me right now, you're obviously a racist. If you disagree with me right now, you're obviously a white supremacist. And that just doesn't make any logical sense. To think that Mount Rushmore and the presidents that are displayed on it honors our country in and of itself should not be a problematic sentence. That should not be a sentence that I say here on the radio and get complaints about. And yet you probably can. It's something that probably can happen in today's day and age. So many things can. And it's just surreal to me to think that our president would like to honor the nation via fireworks at at one of the biggest monuments, one of the most well-known monuments in our country, and that would be a very challenged concept. And then, by the way, the amount that it's being covered on CNN is surreal. And I saw a report that there's two things they missed yesterday in their prime time coverage, two very big stories that they just neglected entirely. One which is just very odd to me as to why they do it. First, the jobs report, which is something that certainly deserves to be talked about quite a bit. It was a very strong jobs report. The president, very proud of it, touting the benefits of generating almost 5 million jobs. CNN primetime, let's just not even cover that. Let's skip the 4.8 million new jobs that exist because it demonstrates an economy in recovery and a president who has continued to do well in that world. In the world of our economy, he has continued to succeed to a degree that a lot of other presidents have not. And then you go even further, the Ghislaine Maxwell story. She is arrested. She has ties to a lot of people, and a lot of different threads will be pulled as we find out more about her and Jeffrey Epstein's connection. and all the different things she knows. She has something like 20 bank accounts in the country with all random numbers, some up to $20 million in them. She knows a lot of things. Bill Clinton, one of the people that she may be connected to, CNN didn't talk about it at all. I think they discussed it in some of the non-prime time stories they had. No coverage. And then today, the president going to have a firework display at Mount Rushmore, wall to wall. This is breaking news for the next few, probably the next 2 days. Even after it happens, there's going to be breaking news of the fallout of that decision for sure. So it's just, the world right now at times. This is exasperated version of me just, I guess, venting to you. On this show today, we'll also be talking to a lawyer, Rich Lenkov, out of Chicago, about a few of these stories, including the Ghislaine Maxwell story, because I just think it's tremendously important to talk about the potential legal web that will slowly unravel, how long this case will take, and all the things that may come from it. And certainly he can't really give us too much of that detail because I don't think a lot of us know how far that's going to go and all the people that will wind up being discussed. And just the fact that she's still with us is something that shocked a lot of people. This is Craig Collins filling in on the Chad Benson Show. A lot to talk about today, but a lot of fun, hopefully, to be had, too. Back in just a sec.
No need to fear. We promise we won't give you a noogie and make you cry Russia, Russia, Russia.
Who is the fearless leader?
Fui!
Fui, fui, and double fui!
What is your language? This is a family show, remember?
Fui to families too!
Nostrovia. This is Chad Benson.
Craig Collins filling in on the Chad Benson Show. Chad is back with you guys next week. Thrilled to be here. You've heard it several times. You've heard it all different kinds of places. President Trump aware of bounties that were issued by Russia to militants to kill U.S. armed forces, and he did nothing. That is the narrative being talked about. One guy who's been out there in the public world quite a bit, and I even contemplated playing the audio because it's funny in light of what I'll tell you after. But honestly, Adam Schiff is all over the place all the time, complaining about anything and everything that has to do with the president and saying that it's outrageous, for lack of other terms. I don't want to say exactly what he said, but that's paraphrasing that the president has done nothing about it. Guess what? The Federalist recently reported that Adam Schiff may have known about this. His top aides may have been briefed about the Russia bounty suspicions as far back as February in Afghanistan. And Schiff decided to do nothing. He didn't alert anyone. He didn't tell any of his colleagues. He didn't tell the intel committee that he's on. He didn't hold any hearings. He did nothing. He didn't think it was significant, to quote the Federalist and the inside sources they have on this. Adam Schiff is saying just how terrible it is that the president did nothing in this story, and yet he may have known about it also and not cared. And the president, we're still not even truly sure when and if he was briefed on this, because as you've heard from the White House, if the reports were inconclusive, if the Intelligence Committee was not convinced that this were a true story, briefing the president on it may not have made sense. But Adam Schiff might have known, and that to me is something you're not going to hear a lot of places today, and something that certainly the Federalist, at least right now, is claiming is absolutely the truth, and just surreal, if that's accurate. Surreal that you can go on TV wearing a mask, by the way, which Schiff spoke through while giving a press conference recently, and talk about how horrible it is that President Trump could have done what he did as far as the story goes, and yet Schiff may have done the exact same thing, if not the actual ignoring of this story, where the president may not have known about it. That is still absolutely part of the conversation. The hypocrisy, it feels so good, doesn't it? I don't know. Maybe it doesn't feel great. By the way, Mike Pence is going to have to cancel a upcoming trip he had planned to Arizona. Secret Service agents have tested positive for COVID-19. This will delay the trip at best, hopefully, and hopefully everyone is okay in this situation. And the coronavirus test that probably was mandatory before this trip has unearthed something that hopefully is just asymptomatic. There are a lot of stories about the coronavirus, of course, over the last day. 55,000 new cases in a single day. That jumps up another 5,000 from the day before. These are all-time highs here in the United States of America, and certainly scary numbers to a lot of people. I actually saw that a recent poll said that a lot of Americans, 65% in fact, feel like our situation is getting worse. That's from a Gallup poll. And this is, in a lot of ways, I think, a big part of the ongoing conversation that we'll have over the next few weeks, months, years. What is the right response now? If you see cases jump up like this, but you maybe have to dive a little deeper into the numbers to best understand them, and who is telling us what is the best approach to this? Can we contain this? Is this younger people getting this? No matter how they're getting it. And certainly, and I guess it might be, somewhat problematic to bring this up, but the amount of protesting that went on was almost entirely young people. And in a lot of places, young people are now coming down with COVID-19. I don't know if those two things are exactly connected. And I don't know that we've had a good amount of reporting on that yet. But whether or not it's people hanging out at bars, people hanging out on the beach, wherever they're going, young people seem to be willing to get COVID-19, at least to a certain extent, because they're taking less precautions than maybe other individuals are. And that is then turning into more cases, of course, with more testing as well. But this is an ongoing story. More information every single day will break on this. It is worrisome to me that Americans are so concerned about this for a lot of reasons. And it's also worrisome to me that we're seeing these kind of numbers. I'm not going to ignore that could be a need for us to continue to pay attention to and respond to as it goes. But the hope is, and I think from all experts, that you can contain this in certain areas and not have it be the nationwide shutdown that we experienced in the past, or predominantly a lot of the nation shutting down, not all of it, I guess, but a majority of it shutting down. We hope to avoid that even within states that are seeing outbreaks, that you can contain it within the areas that exist. But 65% of U.S. adults say the coronavirus situation is getting worse. And obviously with numbers getting higher, that would be a pretty easy 1-2 step for a lot of people. All right. Rich Lenkov is going to join the show. He's going to break down everything that is the Ghislaine Maxwell arrest and the potential story there. We will talk about other couple of the bigger news stories that have hit as far as legal things go. He is a legal expert out of Chicago with Bryce Downey and Lenkov. Very helpful, obviously, to have an expert on. Coming up in just a bit. Chad Benson Show. Craig Collins filling in.
Chad Benson Show.
Independent thoughts, independent life. This is Chad Benson.
This is the Chad Benson Show. I am your host, Craig Collins. I have asked one of my legal expert buddy friends, Rich Lenkov, who is the host of the WGN Plus podcast, WGN Radio Network podcast, Legal Face Off, one of the premier podcasts in our country that covers legal topics on a bi-weekly basis, to jump in and give me more information about the Ghislaine Maxwell case. Rich, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Craig. It's great to be here.
Thrilled to have you on. So let's get right into it. As far as this case goes, the amount of potential threads that will be pulled by prosecutors have to be just tremendous. I would love to know at least your first reaction to the fact that she was arrested recently, and how long a case like this would take to be fully tried, or maybe it's more likely that there's some sort of deal that happens and we don't get that far into it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there'll be a deal. It doesn't seem like it, given how much time and effort she put into eluding authorities, right? I mean, she was caught up in a sprawling mansion in New Hampshire that she paid for with cash. So she's definitely made a lot of effort to not be caught by the authorities. Whether there'll be other parties involved, for sure, right? I think that once you pull this thread, there'll be a lot of other accomplices that have not so far been identified that will come out. Inevitable results of catching someone like this, especially by the federal government, is that you try to flip them, right? And to your point, not necessarily that she'll get out or be released, but she'll definitely try to save her own skin by identifying others. Not the least of which might be Prince Andrew. That's the other intriguing part of the story, is that the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney yesterday in a press conference said she does very much want Prince Andrew to facilitate some of the investigation to come forward. He has said that he's already put forth some effort to come forward twice, but he's definitely going to be a central figure as we go forward.
Let me ask you this. The thing it can most be compared to in my mind, I guess, because of the web, the darkness of this whole story is maybe drug cartels. And when you flip someone and someone as knowledgeable as Ghislaine Maxwell will be, a friend, if not at one point girlfriend of Jeffrey Epstein and the facilitator of a lot of the atrocities that took place as far as underage girls that were brought into and used for Jeffrey Epstein and a lot of his friends. You said a second ago that they'll try to flip her. Does that mean that she would wind up, because of the high-profile individuals that she could name and wind up, helping the prosecutors find, be completely exonerated, or whatever the word would be? I guess just given some form of she herself will be freed.
Could be. I mean, like I said, I don't expect that simply because she is such a main figure, and we saw her in the pictures, and by all accounts, she has been involved for years with Epstein in facilitating some of these arrangements involving trafficking of underage girls. I don't know that she's going to get off entirely. If I was the prosecutor, that would be, that wouldn't be a good look. That being said, like we talked about, you're always looking to get additional witnesses and additional possible defendants by flipping one, right? It only takes one person, and the dominoes start to fall. So she could cut a deal. She could lower her sentence. I don't expect, though, that the U.S. attorney, again, given
would
how
give her immunity.
She would give her immunity. I don't think so. I would not do so. But you never know, right? We don't know how many other high-profile individuals are involved. It just depends on how much she's willing to talk.
How odd is it? You mentioned the fact that she bought a mansion in cash. How odd is it that she has multiple bank accounts, something like 20, with all kinds of different funds in them, up to $20 million in some bank accounts? And how many things like that will be utilized to encourage her to flip? She's always professed her own innocence in all this. So I don't know how you motivate her, per se, to become a person who becomes as forthcoming as people would want her to be.
Yeah, well, money doesn't buy everything, right? I mean, no matter how much money you have, we've seen lots of high-profile examples of people going to jail. So the prospect of sitting in the jail cell makes all that money and all those mansions pretty irrelevant. She comes from, obviously, a father who is a media magnate in Great Britain. So she's obviously got deep pockets, and she's amassed that fortune over many years. So the fact that she has money, and she'll probably hire some great attorneys, doesn't change the fact that once you're facing the prospect of a federal jail cell, that all can go away. And the federal government, Craig, as you know, has a pretty good track record on these things. They have something like a 90%, upwards of 90% success rate when they charge someone. So she's got an uphill battle for sure, no matter how many New Hampshire mansions she has.
Got it. That is good news, I think, to a lot of people. And just the fact that she'll be tried most likely, and that the prosecutors would allow victims to face someone. Obviously, when Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide, I'm going to say. But when that happened, when Jeffrey Epstein was no longer with us, it did not allow any of the victims to be capable of speaking directly to someone in the court of law. That in and of itself is probably a victory for prosecutors and those impacted by the Jeffrey Epstein story.
Yeah, for sure. We heard from one of the victims yesterday, Michelle Licata, who said it's definitely a win, and that there's definitely more co-conspirators at large. So I think it's always a good thing, especially in these days when you have people coming forth and telling their stories who otherwise were too afraid or too intimidated to do so. So yeah, it's great, and we'll see a lot more accusers testify should this go to trial, and have their stories told, which is obviously a very important thing.
Since I have you here, Rich, and you're a legal expert on all kinds of things, I'd love to ask you about some of the Supreme Court decisions that have happened recently. They've been in the news mostly because of the way in which maybe they disagree with the current administration and the fact that the president has placed two people recently on the Supreme Court, more so than the decisions that were actually made by the Supreme Court. I think the bigger narrative has been whether or not there's a rift between the court itself and the current president of the United States.
Yeah, President Trump tweeted last week that I guess the Supreme Court doesn't like me given some of these decisions, which shows you that, to your point, some of the justices that he's appointed, Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, are not necessarily going to rule lock and step the way he expected. And that's not unusual, Craig, for Supreme Court justices. Obviously, they're appointed for life, and, you know, even though they might be appointed by the right or the left, they are supposed to be unbiased. That being said, you know, a lot of folks are freaking out, I think, over what Chief Justice Roberts did in the abortion case earlier this week and what Gorsuch did in the LGBTQ case a week or so ago. And I would tell those people to, you know, don't think that this is a trend. Gorsuch, in his short time on the bench, has shown to be a fairly reliable conservative vote. And Chief Justice Roberts, even though he did concur in the majority in the abortion case, he did so not because he believes in abortion. He really doesn't, by all accounts, and, you know, consistent with his prior rulings in favor of abortion restrictions. What he did in the abortion case on Monday was say that because the Louisiana case was similar to a Texas case, his hands were tied, that because of precedents, stare decisis, he had to rule that way. So this was more of a case of Roberts being consistent rather than philosophically or judicially believing that abortion rights should be expanded.
Well, and the bigger thing for me, just as a reaction, is you heard on all the talking head news stations so often that it was a horrible thing that President Trump was capable of putting people on the Supreme Court because it was going to ruin the Supreme Court for just years to come. And yet, in the recent few weeks, you've seen several cases go the opposite direction of the president, highlighting what you just said a second ago, that these people, once put in a position, wind up serving that role the way that we would hope they all do, I guess, and having their own opinion irrelevant to what political party they might be tied to or who appointed them. So I guess the biggest narrative for me, for those concerned, is that they can take a step back and say, okay, it's not a horrible thing that President Trump was capable of putting people on the court in the first place.
Well, yeah, and you can look at it two ways. I mean, listen, elections matter, right? And President Trump was elected, and he made no secret of the fact when he was running, and he was the first president to do this, Craig, that he had a list of conservative judges that he would, from which he would appoint Supreme Court justices, and he did so. And you have the right, as a Republican, as a conservative, to appoint conservative justices. That's a tradition that goes back, you know, forever. And if you're a Democrat, the same way. So, you know, elections matter. If you don't like who Trump has appointed to the Supreme Court, there will be more vacancies coming up. We've got some old justices on the Supreme Court. You know, vote the way you think. That being said, to your point, I think the good news is objectively judges on the Supreme Court, justices, you would hope, are not beholden to any political party and are deciding cases based on how they see them. And there are lots of examples of judges who were appointed by either Democrats or conservatives who you would thought, you know, people thought would be reliable who weren't. David Souter was appointed by George H.W. Bush in 1990, and he was supposed to be very conservative. And he ended up almost always voting with the liberal wing. So you really never do know what you're getting.
I'm just sending your audio to CNN so they're aware. I thank you for telling me that. Real quick before I let you go, I know you're based in Chicago, so I want to ask you about an Illinois decision that just happened the other day. And I didn't prep you on this one, but I'm sure you're aware of it, living where you do. There were two lawsuits against the governor in Illinois, Governor Pritzker, relating to the executive action he took, the things he chose to do during the pandemic to shut down that state for multiple months, beyond what I guess would have been his authority to do so for about 30 days. Even though one of those lawsuits, the bigger of the two, he wound up winning, Governor Pritzker. The other lawsuit, the one that was kind of seen as a publicity stunt by a Republican in downstate Illinois, wound up going the other way. And I'm not sure what the fallout is in Illinois or in general if court decisions go against governors in their ability to do things like unilaterally shut down states. Do you have a reaction to that story?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a complicated question. There have been some downstate Illinois judges, or one judge in particular, that did rule in favor of the legislator who brought the lawsuit, ruling that what Governor Pritzker did, who is a Democrat, was in fact unconstitutional. Now, the big picture is that generally the trend has been, both in our state and across the United States, that governors have been granted the authority legally to do things like shutdowns and even require masks. We covered on our podcast earlier this week the ability that Governor Newsom in California has legally to enforce masks. And by all accounts, while a lot of this has not yet been worked its way through the courts because it's brand new, governors and presidents, the chief executives of the state or the country, have wide-ranging authority to enforce that because of the nature of this, the pandemic. But it'll be challenged, and there are some pockets in the country and even in our state where that challenge has been successful. But big picture, I think most judges and most appellate courts, specifically the ones that really do decide these, have ruled in favor of the governors and the president if a challenge comes to the president's authority.
Great information. Thank you, as always, for joining us. Rich Lenkov is a co-host of Legal Face-Off. I always get that. It's part of the WGN Plus podcast network, long-running and one of the best legal podcast shows out there. Rich, thanks for joining the show.
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate it.
Quick break. The Chad Benson Show. Craig Collins filling in.
Take a fake news break. Check out the really important news of the day at our website, ChadBensonShow.com. Once there, click on Chad's free podcast and get real. The Chad Benson Show, where truth and the American way live. Print free.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins, filling in today. Breaking news. Facebook gave away data to third-party developer. No, this isn't an old story from years ago. This happened just this week, I guess. In a Wednesday post, Facebook announced that, thousands of developers continue to receive updates to users' non-public information well past the point when they should have. Specifically, Facebook said that for an unspecified number of users. That's always comforting. Facebook, billions of people use this thing, unspecified number of how. That probably means everybody, right? If you give an unspecified number and you're a group as big as Facebook, the answer is everybody, anybody and anyone that they wanted. It failed to cut off the data spigot like it promised to when it was tried and talked about this back in 2018. Certainly the public very upset about 90 days after a person had last used an app. They just continue to, we're giving that information out. And no news on if they're kind of doing it, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, purposefully and selling it. When reached out to Facebook in an attempt to determine just how many users had their data improperly sent to third-party apps, they're going to continue to not answer that question, which that doesn't make any sense to me. When you have data breaches in other situations, and by the way, Facebook has probably as much information on you as a lot of those other places do, and certainly information that's going to be valuable to people stealing things like your identity. I don't know why, if we have a data breach from any other organization, actually, that they have to tell everybody that it happened, and Facebook just is going to, kind of ignore that, tell you to change your profile, probably change your password, and then move on. This is not the first time, of course, that this has happened with Facebook. In late 2019, they had a lot of issues, and there was even a shocking blog post which said that people were still getting this sort of thing done. So Facebook continues to be a seller, or at least accidental supplier, of information. That is really what their business is. It has nothing to do with being a social media platform that people can put posts on. It's the fact that they know a whole bunch of stuff about you, and that information is available to a lot of the advertisers that go into that. Do you delete it? That's, I guess, the question for you. And answer us on our Facebook page, which is the best thing I've ever done right there. Do you delete Facebook? Tell us on Facebook or Twitter or any of the platforms the Chad Benson Show is on, or the Craig Collins Show, for that matter. I'm on Facebook as well, and probably not canning that anytime soon. But, man, at least I should think about it a little bit more. I would love to know if that's something that, and maybe it'd be the best thing would be if I see a bunch of comments on one of those pages and then I click on your profile and it's gone. You're like, yeah, I'm doing it. And then you're out within the next 24 hours. But let us know on any of those forms, or maybe just text us. That's probably a better strategy. Although I think that text number, and it goes to Chad, and he's on vacation. So if you're texting the show, you're probably also bugging Chad while he's getting a much needed rest. There are a lot of stuff to talk to you today. talk about today. I saw a story about a restaurant that might be putting in a sterilizing pod. This is a true story out of England. Before you walk into it, that would spray some sort of sterilizing mist on all the different people that would walk in. There's a lot of different components to that mist, but if you want to get a drink at this place in England, you might be walking through it looks almost exactly like one of those screening machines at the TSA at the airport that you go in and you kind of raise your hands and they get the full body scan. That's what it is. And actually, I would do it, just to let you know. There's probably some things in it that I should be worried about. But if you want to get a drink at a bar and you want to feel as safe as possible, no word on if this actually has been scientifically tested, but they want to do it. And they sell, by the way, for $10,000. So if a lot of other places want to get in on the sterilizing pod before walking into the building, and I don't even know, do you do it? This is an odd question, but do you do it with clothes on? Because what gets sterilized? How does it all work? There's windows on it. I'm looking at the product right now, so I hope it's not, something where you got to take some things off. All right, this is Craig Collins filling in on the Chad Benson Show. So much more coming up in just a bit.
This is the Chad Benson Show. Independent thoughts, independent life. This is Chad Benson.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins, filling in with you. Happy to be here. Chad back after a much-needed extended holiday for him. Happy almost 4th of July to you and the president, who is going to celebrate at at Mount Rushmore in South Dakota, and very excited to do that. Shifting gears to other news, the protests that have been going on in a lot of places are certainly a topic of conversation on almost a daily basis. In Portland, these protests over the last few days, or at least twice, have been reclassified as riots. Yesterday, and there's a bunch of live streaming video all over social media, the riots that took place at certain points certainly look the part of things that are much less peaceful and a lot more aggressive. Part of the reason, I guess, is fireworks. Fireworks are being used periodically, creating actual fires in areas. It would be strange if you are maybe someone intent on peacefully protesting and or a law enforcement official asked to stand and make sure that something remains peaceful, to see fireworks utilized, because that is, I don't know, something that certainly doesn't ping of safe or ping of not adding some level of violence or some level of risk to the situation. So I don't get it. I get that the 4th of July is coming up. I get that fireworks might be a lot of places, but they set a few different fires with fireworks throughout the evening. Twice, police had to clear the area. Eventually, police would disengage and leave. I think the first time that they chose to clear the area and then leave was just before midnight, all the way to about 12:15. But once the police decided to leave, the protesters and then, I guess, rioters, when it's reclassified, showed back up in the area. And this is the kind of thing that we're seeing a lot of places throughout our country right now. I don't know what the right answer is. I know at times that it doesn't seem to be to do what politicians have done in some of these areas, including telling police to not engage or telling police to not utilize things like pepper spray or pretty much anything. And I guess to allow people to continue to up the level of aggression, because that's what it is, right? That's truthfully what it is. If protesters organize and then do not peacefully protest, and I want to say this real quick, I want the caveat to be that a whole lot of the demonstrations that exist throughout our country are peaceful protests. And I agree with everyone's right to peacefully assemble and protest. That is an American right, and I do not at all criticize any of the people who do this in a peaceful way. But the minute you start provoking, the minute you start doing things like setting fires, you're kind of testing the waters, in my opinion, as to how far you can go before inevitably things get prevented, things get shut down by law enforcement officials. And that is bad. That is a bad situation. Maybe the most obvious thing I've said today, jumping in on the show, is you do not want people to feel greater senses of ability in the world of doing things more provocative than just simply peacefully assembling. That is not a world we want to get into. And it's certainly something that takes place as far as the conversation with statues, the conversation with all different kinds of monuments that are now thought to be problematic by members of our society, members of all different, races, sexes. It's certainly people across the board, I think, on certain political aisles that feel that some things are more challenging than others. And what I thought was really interesting when you politicize this conversation is Utah Senator Mike Lee. He recently spoke about this. He recently actually was talking in front of the Senate about this. And man, were there debates about it. There was some people standing up, some people trying to silence Mike Lee and feel that he is inappropriately speaking as far as some legislation that he'd like to see everyone unilaterally agree to. Here is a little bit of what that sounded like.
These mobs are not progressive. These mobs are not enlightened. These mobs are not edgy. They're not hip. They're frauds. They're dim-witted, phony drama addicts.
And then there's some debating, then there's some fighting, and then eventually it's decided that Mike can continue, and he continues.
Failed by an education system and addled by a social media culture that taught them to be victims instead of citizens. A privileged, self-absorbed crime syndicate with participation trophy graduate degrees trying to find meaning in empty lives by destroying things that other Americans have spent honest, productive lives building. Today we learn that there are those who are comfortable with this. There are those who are at least not inclined to vote for this resolution, which simply condemns mob violence.
So is that a hot take at times? Yeah, I actually think it is. I even think it is at times, the wording that Mike chooses to use and the way in which he describes individuals that are doing certain actions. And yet then you go back and you compare it to Portland and you think that there's a huge difference between what is peaceful protesting and what is inevitable rioting. What are the other more risky things that are happening? And I've said this a lot of times, even to people that I try to listen to, people that I don't agree with. And I think it's tremendously important that we all talk to people we don't agree with and try as best we can at times to listen. That doesn't mean you have to agree. You get to respond. That's the whole point of discourse, debate, conversation, at least if you're not doing it on social media and assuming everyone agrees with you. But when I have those conversations and I say those sort of things and then I sit there and try to listen to the responses back, some of the things you hear from people that support the looting, the rioting that has existed at times in our country is scary to me. Some of it is sort of a forgiveness amount of conversing. It says, well, because of certain things, obviously there's anger, so it's okay. And then you start talking about monuments and statues and things that might be problematic. And you're told by people who support the idea of pulling more of this stuff down than I do, that, it's got to get taken down. And if no one listens, you got to do it yourself. And that's anti-American to do something yourself, to decide to jump in and rip stuff down and, vandalize things. The correct way to do it is through the political process, through legislators and officials that can take a cause to the Senate, to the White House, to any organization that it needs to get taken to, and create laws and make new decisions. Those are conversations that need to have. There is no mob version of this. There is no ability for you to decide that, well, they didn't listen to my upsetness over this statue, so I have to destroy it. I have to get up and destroy it right now. And the people you talk to who forgive that action are like, well, they weren't gonna take it down, so you had to destroy it. It makes no sense to me. It doesn't. And I'm not trying to dismiss the conversations themselves. I'm willing to have them with people that I know, with people that want to call into radio shows, with people that want to voice their opinion anyway, every way. That's part of what it means to be an American in our country, is that you, whoever you are, and there's no qualified version of people that are allowed to say more things than anybody else. We're all allowed to speak and we're all allowed to give opinions. And then for things to change in our society, they have to go through certain beneficial areas. They have to go through certain beneficial systems. They don't just happen on their own. No one wants that. I don't think anyone, even the protesters that I speak to, the people who peacefully assemble certain places and believe, like many Americans do, that there are issues that need to be solved. Even those individuals, a large majority of them, don't think the right response is physical. The right response is breaking things. The right response is tearing stuff down. That's just not the way that a lot of people want this to go. And it's certainly a way that any actual message will be overshadowed by the amounts of need to prevent things like damage to parts of our country. Or when protesting turns violent, the story will always be the violence. It will just always be. There's no way to prevent that because there's two things happening. You go and protest something and you want to raise awareness to a cause, and then an immediate action takes place at times, which is very different than whatever cause you're trying to raise awareness for, and it's damage that needs to be stopped. I mean, to try to compare it to anything, to try to make my point a little bit better, it's like telling me that we have climate change issues and then not report on a specific tornado. If a tornado comes into an area and damages things, that's the head story, not whether or not there's climate change. The story becomes, what's the damage being caused by the tornado? And if you want the conversation to be something else, there can't be current damage and broken things and fires and fireworks. That's just not the way it goes. This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins, filling in just in case you're curious who it is speaking. I want to cover one silly story. I like silly stories, and this one to me is pretty funny. There is I'm going to talk about it. I'm debating whether or not I should, but I'm going to. A nudist beach that is going to require one thing. Yes, a mask. I think this is funny, and I don't think it's funny because I think masks don't need to be worn. I, like a lot of people, actually agree they should. Even Sean Hannity, I think, now has a PSA about that I could play for you in a second. But I just think it's amusing that if you're the type of person that goes to a nude beach, that you'd still rock a mask. Because I can think of a lot of ways in which maybe I would shy away from the beach in general at this point. And by the way, just also to say, anybody who's never been to one, and I've never been to one, you're told that it's not what you think. It's not going to be the glorious world that some men might picture. It's going to be a very different situation. But if I were making my own judgments at this time, and this is, I guess, as serious as I can be on this topic, and there's even a photo of some people. Hopefully, it's covered up in the ways that it looks like it's covered up here. Just showing wearing masks and saying that it's a smart thing to do. But I would shy away from the whole beach. That's just me. That's the kind of PSA I can get behind in 2020 here on the Chad Benson Show. Craig Collins filling in. Is nude beaches. Maybe skip them for a little bit. I will play that PSA, actually. I like this PSA. I thought it was interesting from Fox and Sean Hannity. So let me do this, and then we'll take a break after this. But here's the PSA of Sean telling you that you should wear a mask, or that he at least wears one, which is certainly a messaging that we have not seen as much from some places, but not necessarily one that Sean ever really disagreed with.
All right, so I've been saying all along throughout the pandemic, COVID-19, essential employees all across America, they never stopped working. Masks, PPE, it kept them safe, and I was right here in the epicenter. And every store I went to, everybody was wearing their mask, and thankfully, in my grocery store, nobody got COVID-19. So, what did I learn? I don't have a problem wearing a mask, especially if it means we can go to a ball game or to defend grandma, grandpa, mom, and dad. That's why I choose to do it.
PSA. Going to be airing now on Fox News with Sean Hannity saying that's why he chooses to wear a mask. And it's that last part that I think a lot of us can agree with, no matter how you feel about the actual protective capabilities of a mask, which are still scientifically debated to some extent. I am being honest when I say that. I'm not being biased. If you wear a mask and someone else doesn't, and liquid gets on your mask, it's not always a guarantee that can't get into your body. But as I mentioned that, I say that when he points out, Sean, in that PSA, that wearing masks as a society helps us keep things open and not close things down, it's an easy conversation for me. If that is the push-pull of the situation, I put a mask on, other people do, and we're allowed to stay open and not get closed, that's enough of an argument for me. I understand if it's not for you, but it's certainly a powerful statement, in my opinion, as to why, debate on that kind of thing can be secondary to making sure that nothing gets shut down unilaterally, and that we get to stay open and we get to have our businesses continue to operate as much as possible in all those areas. I want to talk about baseball after a quick break here. The Yankees, among other teams, are saying that they might try to get fans in stands, and that's something I can definitely back in 2020. Craig Collins filling in on the Chad Benson Show.
I'm exhausted.
If you're part of the politically exhausted majority, don't fear. Your time to be validated and rejuvenated is here. Wake up. It's the Chad Benson Show.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins. I'm filling in for today. Chad will be back next week. Yankees owner, Yankees manager Hal Steinbrenner says he doesn't expect the whole season to go, the baseball season to go fanless. He thinks there will be fans in the stands. Up to 30%, I think, is a number he kind of floated. But he said, and I quote, and this was to the Yes Network, which broadcasts all the Yankee games, "I do expect to see fans in our stadium at some point to some degree, and that's going to be a great day as well." You know, the first reaction I have to this, and I should preface all this with I'm a Yankee fan. I'm currently wearing a Yankee hat, and I'm aware that might have just alienated some of my listeners. I'm sorry. I grew up, a Yankee fan the whole time. Had no idea what a payroll was, is the way I always validate it to those who say that the Yankees are an evil empire. They're not. They're a lovely, valuable franchise, in my opinion, and Derek Jeter should have been 100% voted into the Hall of Fame. Anyway, let's move on. When I see all these stories, the first thing I start to think, if fans do sit in stands, I wonder if that's going to actually make the players mad to some degree. I doubt they'll be mad at the fans. I think they'd be thrilled to have people watch them play baseball, interact with them, cheer for them. I think that sports with fans is tremendously better than without them. But if you remember during the negotiation process where baseball was at times maybe not going to happen at all, the biggest argument from the owners to the players is that money was going to be tremendously impacted by the fact that there'd be no fans at any point inside the stadium for the entire season in the playoffs. And the only money made by the owners would be television rights money, and it would be predominantly from playoff baseball. So there was a huge conversation as to what amount of money, if any, made sense to throw at this season to make sure that it would happen. And players obviously thought it was the amount that is appropriate compared to their salaries for the amount of games they play, and owners felt it should have been much less. And obviously there will be a lot of games with no fans, and then a lot of games with only 30% of fans. But truthfully, I wonder if this further deepens any sort of potential problems that exist when baseball tries to re-up on their labor negotiations, which they will be doing relatively soon. This is the kind of thing that I'm sure will be both a great and it's sort of a double-edged sword. Players, owners, everybody wants fans to be able to enjoy the game. That's not at all going to be debated. But what might be debated is just how much, and I wonder if it even helps the players who are likely to file a grievance against the owners for negotiating in bad faith. If you wind up putting fans into stadiums, does that hurt the ownership as far as a potential lawsuit is concerned and as far as potential grievance amounts are provided to players? I don't know. But all that being said, I do very much hope that fans are allowed to watch baseball at some point this year in person to even a very reduced capacity with a lot of social distancing and masks, all things that are required, because there's nothing like seeing baseball live. Any of my friends that tell me that baseball is a boring sport compared to the other popular American sports, I always tell them you got to go see it. If you've never actually been to a game, never actually enjoyed one in person, in the stands, eating a hot dog, you just don't know what it is that you're criticizing. And even though it's going to be a very shortened season, and we're probably going to throw out a lot of the season numbers as not mattering all that much, it's going to be tremendous to have baseball played this year. One other thing that I really like a lot, and I think I'll have to play it after a break, so I got to take a break in a bit, but it is an Amazon driver out of Detroit who quit the job mid-shift. The guy's 22 years old, and he was complaining to a television station there that he just kept getting more packages every day he showed up. So one day he just abandoned ship. He, halfway through a delivery day, had a van and just left it at a gas station. He talked to news organizations about it. And even though I don't condone any of the things he did, this is the wrong approach for sure. We all can understand that if you get frustrated with a job every so often, that the way in which maybe you imagine quitting is similar to the way that he did, but not the way that you actually quit. When you rationalize the decision-making here, when you start to think about the impact of just like leaving, you realize that maybe it's way more beneficial to you professionally to not do it that way. But it is funny to me. And the guy said he was just getting more packages, a longer route every day. So you know what? He was done. This is Craig Collins filling in on the Chad Benson Show. I'll play that audio in a bit.
Chad Benson Show.
Independent thoughts, independent life. This is Chad Benson.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins. I mentioned a little bit earlier on in the program that I very much enjoy the Amazon driver story, a guy out of Detroit who just decided to quit his shift. Not because I totally condone the behavior. I think that if cooler heads had prevailed in this situation, that Detroit guy would have decided to quit normally and not leave his van at a gas station halfway through his day of delivering packages. Although he said he was just fed up. And while I wish the audio had allowed him to be even more unfiltered, this is what he said when he was caught up with by a local news organization as to why he just abandoned ship halfway through a shift.
If you fed up with your job, you just got to be fed up with it. It was immature and irresponsible on my end, but at the same time, enough is enough. So I just got irritated. And I went on Twitter. I go on social media to vent my problem. It was days where I had to deliver 158, 212, and they just kept going up and up.
See, okay, so the guy said, yeah, it's immature. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have done it. But every day I'm showing up to work and they're looking at me and saying, hey, man, you got 150 packages today, 220. It's just going to keep going in a certain direction. And he started looking at them like, I can't do all that. I can't. And maybe that conversation deserved to be had a better place. I don't know what happened to the van. I think that the keys were just in it and he just left it there. And he just said, you know what? Screw it. Let's hope that somebody else does. I believe that this actually happened in Seinfeld. I think that this is pulling a Costanza, or at least certainly not delivering mail the correct way. But he just decided, you know what? I'm done. I'm out. And many of us have had that dream of just walking off the gig if you ever get very mad at whatever your employer is. And I will continue to tell you, and I would certainly coach anyone that asks me, that's not the right way to go about things. But at times it can be kind of the funny way to go about things. I also saw this, a Bristol pub, this is in the UK, had decided on whether or not it wanted to rename its restaurant because of some ties it might have to things that are no longer woke. And so the internet got to decide the new name of the establishment. And for a few days before maybe they decided that that's probably not the right way to go about it, the pub's name was changed to Ye Olde Pubby McDrunkface. I love when the internet's allowed to vote on things or come up with names themselves, because that's when you immediately realize that the collective consciousness that is the social media world is not always the most valuable. That's when you realize that they're really just out for being as troll-worthy as possible. And so if you're an establishment that's like, hey, we're woke now, we're going to let you rename our pub so that it's not problematic at all. What do you think the name should be? Ye Olde Pubby McDrunkface is going to be the old-time winner. It's going to be the kind of thing you see all the time. I mean, I've even seen celebrities be willing to name kids after what people vote for on social media. And that's a world that I don't totally understand, to say the very least. To shift gears to something a tad more serious, I guess, something more newsworthy. Dr. Fauci has once again warned of outbreaks, greater outbreaks being ahead for the United States. I know people have a lot of opinions about Dr. Fauci and whether or not his voice is valuable anymore. And I will actually let two individuals take the lead on that. I will let Neil Cavuto and Andy Biggs, a politician out of Arizona, discuss this in depth. This is probably viral footage that you've seen in the last 24 hours or so. This is Andy appearing on Neil's show and deciding that Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx's time of necessity, time of value is over, and Neil not being okay with that. And they go back and forth. And then I'll tell you what I think of having doctors like a Dr. Fauci continue to be one of the leading voices in the coverage and the reactions to COVID-19. But here's how they discuss this.
I think that Birx and Fauci have gone well past they've expired. Their time of usefulness has expired. What they do is when the president comes out and makes a policy, because he is the president and he is the policymaker, when they come out and they make these statements that they make, they engender panic and hysteria and undermine what the president's doing. That's what I think is critical.
Doesn't he defer to them as the health experts? Doesn't he have a commission because he defers to them as the health experts? And they're citing worries. They're citing also that we can get this under control. It needn't be a panic if people do what they should be doing. But isn't that what doctors do, kind of look after people's lives?
All right, here's my first response to that part of the conversation. As you can tell that they're both going to get a little bit more animated as this continues, and I might play more of it. But to answer Neil's question, yes, that is what doctors do. They protect lives. They give you health-related advice. But the question of whether or not to, say, close a state or close an economy is unfortunately maybe for the doctors a multifaceted conversation, because there's a lot of other things that could impact our public health, for lack of a better word to describe it, including a lack of employment, a lack of financial security. That does have an impact on mental health and on actual well-being, as demonstrated by a lot of people who start talking about things like suicide. So there's a multifaceted conversation, which is why if you have a task force, let's say, of individuals giving you advice on what to do during a time like this, it is different walks of life, people with different expertise that wind up all advising you on what is the best possible decision. This is healthcare people who tell you what the health outlook is. This is financial experts who tell you what the finances are of making certain decisions and what is best for us. It is not unilaterally any one person's decision other than, I guess, the president as to what actions he chooses to take with his office based on the advice he's given. But let's hear a little bit more of that argument.
Well, doctors do, who are treating people and meeting with them daily, and I talk to those doctors on a regular basis. When's the last time Dr. Fauci met with and treated a patient on an individual basis, or Dr. Birx? And when you start talking to people who are on the ground working in emergency rooms.
When's the last time you have?
That's okay. Look, I at times enjoy Neil's program. At times I don't. But when you throw both of these examples out there, when's the last time that Fauci or Birx actually treated a specific patient? And then you ask the politician, when's the last time he's done it? That's in a silly place. This isn't an actual conversation anymore, at least this part of it, because now both individuals, I think, are saying things that are way beyond what the simplistic point is. And the simplistic point to me is going to continue to be that, yes, doctors advise on one aspect of things like this and not all aspects of things like this. Since I enjoy a good argument, let's jump in for a little bit more of this.
What I'm saying is the task force may not be necessary anymore. And what I'm saying is Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx have undermined what this president is trying to do. That, I think, is critical.
In the middle of these upticking cases, in the middle of these upticking cases, you think it's a good idea to disband this commission now, in the middle of this? Just want to be clear.
Yes, I think it's a good idea, but for different reasons. And if you would let me finish and talk about the ICU bed usage and why the numbers that you're citing are important, but they don't tell the full picture, because I think you need a context. And if you let me talk about the overall bed usage in Arizona, and if you let us talk about Arizona's the hotspots
I would love to have you back, and I would like to, and I will get you back to explain how it is 90% bed use in that neck of the woods is not a big deal when it has doubled in effectively the last few weeks.
I love the fact that it ends there, by the way. That's why I wanted to play the rest of the audio, because they go back and forth on whether or not the numbers are reliable and what may be creating a perception that's not necessarily the reality. And look, that's going to be a debate all over the place. And I don't know who's right and wrong in some of that stuff, because I'm not on the ground. I'm not in the hospitals treating people that are sick. But what I have heard, and I'm not sure if you've heard this too, but some of the cases of COVID-19, some of the hospitalizations for COVID-19 are people who were already in hospitals, already treated for some other, I guess, even if it's an elective surgery, some other reason. And then they are diagnosed with COVID-19 either by getting it while in the hospital or having it and not knowing, which is what a big majority of people, well, maybe not a majority, but a large amount of people have. Something like almost 40%, I think, is estimated by even Dr. Fauci, of individuals who have COVID-19, who have coronavirus, might have it with, might have an asymptomatic version of it. No symptoms that ever materialize. Not the same as pre-symptomatic, who are people that eventually have symptoms. But the fact that this conversation goes the way it does and that it's so much back and forth, to me, demonstrates that, yet again, it's so hard for us to have discourse. It's so hard for us as a society or news organizations or whoever to be capable of disagreeing and hearing other points. You just can't hear it. Halfway through the point that you hear, if it's not yours, you're like, no, I'm done. I want no more. And it is. It's still going to be debated. Is it scary to throw out again the number that I saw this morning, 55,000 new cases of COVID-19? Of course it is. Is part of the reason that maybe it's scary because the way the news has covered this from jump? Maybe. Maybe it is. But is our lives being lost to COVID-19? Yes, they are. And that is something that is scary and something that everyone has said we want to see no more of. One life is too many, I think, to quote the president, the vice president, multiple people. So everything we need to do to try to make sure to protect our society, both from a health side and a financial side, are beneficial parts of this conversation. And the inquiry into whether or not every single number you see, every single number you read is 100% a accurate representation of the fight against one specific illness is also a valid conversation. That alone does not make you reject any of the other things that you might hear as far as the potential outbreak of more cases of COVID-19, to just be curious as to how the cases are getting diagnosed and what amount of people are seriously struggling with that or or something else. That in and of itself is not a bad thing to wonder, and not something you got to yell at a guy about on TV to get him to stop talking and then tell him you're definitely going to have him back some other time. If someone jumps on this show and tells me facts that I don't agree with, I'll certainly let them finish their sentence. That's the best I can do. I think a whole lot of us should do that. This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins filling in. Thrilled to be here with you. A quick break and a lot more coming up.
Don't let the Washington Beltway strangle you. This is where the exhausted majority comes to refuel, realign, and reevaluate. This is Chad Benson.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins filling in for today. LeBron James has been talking about how to turn out the vote in 2020, how to get more people to vote. And his idea is one that might not make everybody terribly comfortable. Use sports venues. That's what he said. Have mega voting sites like sports venues where a whole lot of people can go and vote. What's the problem with that idea? Well, COVID-19 is probably the problem with that. And I'm sure that there's some sort of way to mitigate that risk. And a whole lot of people, obviously, I think almost all Americans will vote anyway, will find a way to vote because that's an important right that you need to exercise no matter what. You should vote. But a giant arena filled with hundreds of thousands or at least thousands of voters. I don't know that hundreds of thousands of people ever show up to vote at the same time anywhere, but thousands of voters make sense. In talking about this idea, I guess they are using the Pistons blueprint and their partnership with the Secretary of State in Michigan as an idea, as a way to follow suit and do things where giant arenas, maybe with very distant areas of the arena being utilized to have a certain amount of people vote at a time. Look, I'm fine with it as an idea. I just think it's funny that the More Than a Vote organization, which James has dedicated to maximizing voting turnout, specifically black voting turnout, would float an idea at the current time in which we live to use massive arenas as areas for voting. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it that way. I just know that people of a certain side of the aisle, people that are often very critical of the current president of the United States, say things like rallies make absolutely no sense, say things where large crowds gather in a certain public space don't make sense unless, I guess, they agree with why the people are there. If it's something they support, then that's fine. If it's something they disagree with, well, you should be worried for your health. Very convenient, very interesting. I also saw, speaking about sports for just a second, that most Americans now feel that esports should be included in the Olympics. 56% of Americans say that they'd love to see an Olympic Games where two guys are sitting in chairs playing video games using their fingers. And I think that that's awesome. I think that's awesome for a lot of reasons. First, I would love to see an Olympic sport that is sponsored by Cheetos. That would be my favorite moment, is to have two athletes walk onto the field or wherever it is they'd play whatever the sport is that they're playing. And by the way, there's so many video games that I guess part of the debate would be, is there any game that would have the longevity of, say, track and field? Is there any game that would have the longevity of swimming a relay? I think the answer is probably no, as those consoles and everything about it changes. But just to see it, to see Bob Costas covering two different individuals from different countries walk into whatever, again, arena they're playing in, both of them with a snack in hand, because you got to power up during your match, and playing for an Olympic gold medal. I want to see that happen just because I wouldn't be able to believe it. And I'm not besmirching the abilities of those who play things like video games competitively. I think it's tremendously difficult. I am a guy, I'm in my 30s, I'm a millennial. I grew up on video games. I love video games. And if I play some of the most famous, most popular ones right now, I will be owned by small children. They will be much better than me at them because they're tremendously harder than they used to be. So I'm not even taking away from the skill set that's needed, but I can't see this being an Olympic sport. I mean, I'm surprised it's the kind of thing you can get a scholarship to go to college to play. But I just love the fact that a bunch of Americans are like, yeah, this is what we need to see. This fixes, I guess, they're not saying that, but maybe it'd be funny if they were. This fixes the problem with the Olympics. We could have done 2020 Olympics, no problem. If it's video game Olympics, everybody could do it from their basement. Just think about that. If this was actually an Olympic sport, it's the only one that could have happened this year. You wouldn't have had to have any sort of prevention of anything. People don't have to go anywhere. You can have a guy on his little, video screen there at his house with his little mic set competing for a gold medal. Maybe all of the sports should have been esports in 2020. I kid. I very much kid. But that's an idea. It's out there. I would love to know what you think on our social media pages if esports should be Olympic sports And I think just for humor, I'm down for at least a trial of it. Let's do it for a year and see how it goes. And if it doesn't work out, which it probably won't, maybe never see it again. It's also just the evening of the field. Because any Olympic athlete in any other sport, you see those people, you interact with them. They are, the definition of someone whose their whole body is a machine. Every part of those individuals is dedication to the totality of their human existence being to win a gold medal. And an esport person, well, maybe just as dedicated to a video game, doesn't have to have as sculpted of a physique. That's all I'm saying. There's a lot of advertisement opportunities, I guess, for Olympic sports in the future. One other quick thing, and this is just good news, and certainly good news, I guess, for those who like to casually play video games or just lounge around all day. Drinking might be good for your brain. Dead serious. That is a study out of Georgia. I guess the University of Georgia demonstrated, and they were curious about the effects of drinking on cognitive things that you might struggle with, even things like dementia, which maybe this information has now been sent to Joe Biden. But if you are a light drinker over time, and they tested the cognitive abilities of people for years, the light drinking people performed better than non-drinkers. And they came back year over year, and they threw out all other kinds of things that could be separating factors: age, education, smoker status. It was just a test as to whether or not heavy drinkers, light drinkers, and non-drinkers would do better as they aged on cognitive tests, and light drinkers did the best. It does say here, there is one caveat that if you're a non-drinker, it's not going to help your brain necessarily to pivot to being a light drinker. You do have to, I guess, stay the road in which you've chosen. But if you've your whole life had about 1 to 2 drinks a week, or I guess even up to 10 to 14, 1 to 2 a day, and 10 to 14 a week, you are in the group of people that in a recent study out of Georgia, which I know that these can all be proven wrong, I just enjoy to say, and factually so, on the radio, that light drinking is good for your brain. That is at least according to one study. Other than that, I'm sure more testing will have to be done. But this is Craig Collins filling in on the Chad Benson Show. I love being a part of the show. After another break, I will talk about some of the other scientific findings that I find tremendously interesting. Things like finding that random acts of kindness do benefit you. There's ways in which they pay off. I actually just love diving into scientific studies every day, even though I'm sure you listen to this a week from now again, and they're disproven. And also I found one that said money can buy you happiness, which I'm sure a lot of people, you hear that sentence, you're like, oh, man. And I know that some people are probably stoked to hear that. A lot of us would hope the opposite is true just because it makes everybody feel better. Money can't buy you happiness. And maybe this is the kind of study that no one needed to do. But I have it, all the information, just exactly how money makes you happier. Craig Collins filling in on the Chad Benson Show.
This is the Chad Benson Show. Independent thoughts, independent life. This is Chad Benson.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins filling in for today. The biggest story of the day involves fireworks for some reason, and the Mount Rushmore. And Mount Rushmore and the president, of course. It's always going to involve the president. Every day when you wake up, if the news doesn't somehow relate back to President Trump, I think someone somewhere has decided to take a day off, and that is not going to be today. South Dakota AG Jason Ravnsborg appeared on Fox and Friends this morning to talk about his excitement, first and foremost, in the president going to South Dakota to honor the nation at Mount Rushmore and to deal with the celebration of the 4th of July by having fireworks there. Here is what he said.
Well, I think everybody's very excited that we're having fireworks again. I mean, I think, like you said, we haven't had fireworks in 10 years. I think it's looking like a great day. And, anytime the President of the United States comes to our state, I think we're honored. I think the President's policies line up very well with South Dakota of low taxes, pro-military, and appreciation for law enforcement.
And you would think to yourself, all right, that could be the end of this conversation. The president is going to Mount Rushmore. He's going to celebrate the independence of our country. there can't be a lot of problems with this. People can't be upset. But of course, yes, people are very upset. One of the first questions he then fielded from Fox and Friends, and you know that they're probably even frustrated as they ask it, but does Mount Rushmore actually symbolize white supremacy? That's a real question, a real concern that's out there in the world right now. Here's how he fielded that.
Well, I guess I completely disagree. Each of the presidents were picked for a specific reason. President Washington for obviously the birth of our nation. President Jefferson for the growth of our nation. President Lincoln for the development of our nation, and Teddy Roosevelt for the preservation of our nation. This is a symbol of American exceptionalism, and I believe that there's no way a symbol of white supremacy.
There you go. No way a symbol of white supremacy. Well, what about the fact that the land was stolen? That is another question asked, and when we dive this deep into these questions, I'm just going to let Fox and Friends handle it from here.
Last president that was there was Bush 41, also a combat veteran like you. And some people are looking at these presidents and saying, well, America stole this land from the Indians and then put their presidents in the mountain. How dare they?
Well, that obviously has been a dispute over the years since the time about 1876, but that case has actually been litigated to the United States Supreme Court. We're sympathetic to their feelings on the issue, but I do believe that it was not meant to desecrate the land, but to honor America and honor our state of South Dakota.
People are still going to have a problem. People are going to have a problem, even though the Attorney General in South Dakota says that he understands, he has emotions, and obviously cares about the sentiments of anyone within South Dakota, but does feel that the monument itself is in no way, shape, or form a celebration of anything other than the good that is our country. And it's there to honor the individuals who helped form what our country is today. And for people to feel differently about it, well, again, not telling anyone what opinions they should have or what feelings they should have. The actual monument itself can't possibly be part of that conversation. Whether or not it should be on other land, I guess, is the conversation some may want to have. But it's the world in which we live right now, that you can go enjoy the fireworks, enjoy the 4th of July as the president of the United States at a landmark that is tremendously valuable to our country, and have a debate as to whether or not, one, of course, and from the health perspective, should that even happen? And then two, whether or not the monument should exist at all. That is the current world in which we live. And shifting to a new gear, other information out here in the world, young people who will be a lot of the people that ask you to be woke in certain things are doing some strange things too. At least in Alabama, students are throwing what they are calling COVID-19 parties. These are groups of people that get together. They organize a larger party, and the goal, or I guess the humor, I don't know what it would be called, of it is let's see who gets it first. They thought that it would be fun, according to some of the people that have talked to them now, including a fire chief that caught up with individuals there. They thought it would be a good time to all get together and just kind of be curious as to what happens. And so I don't even know what to say about this story other than that's not a good idea. We probably shouldn't be throwing a party with the game of it being let's see who gets sick. That's probably a bad move, in my opinion, and maybe not the most woke of moves either. Although, yeah, I'm just want to tell you the stories as they go on. I don't even know if there's more that I can do to tell people what they should do in these situations, because health risks are all over the place. If you're in certain areas that have huge outbreaks, it's much scarier than areas that don't. And can you get together with people just to see them? In some areas, absolutely you can. Most areas, you probably can get together with a smaller group of people. But certainly I would never attend a party where the goal is to see if someone gets sick. That's completely out of touch with the seriousness of what's going on in our current world. Let's shift gears to some of the other things that I might have teased a little bit earlier. Science has found that paying acts of kindness in general does pay off over time. This is a lovely thing to study, and the kind of thing we study during a pandemic to make us feel a little bit better about the world. The University of California, San Diego, and a psychologist named Michael McCullough authored this study. It's called Kindness to Strangers. It's the main feature we take for granted. Scientific research is booming into human kindness, apparently, and what scientists have found so far speaks very well, not just to the impact it'll have on your own personal mental health to do a nice thing for another individual, but a lot of other ways in which the fallout is going to be tremendous across the board. Kindness is much older than religion, according to this study. It does seem also to be universal. There is agreement. I mean, that's something that's so hard to find in our world that we currently live in, agreement on anything. and yet no person will look you in the face and say kindness is bad. Maybe somebody would. You never know. Actually, you never know. There might be someone out there who you say, I do random acts of kindness, and they say that's the least woke thing they've ever heard. But I think a majority of us, almost all of us, anyone that's not insane would agree that it's fine. When it comes to the species survival, by the way, which was also studied in this report, kindness does breed additional success and more growth for our society as a whole. We're kind because under the right circumstances, we all benefit from it. For example, people who studied different types of primates and different types of animals compared the aggression within a lot of those species to that of other animals, and they found that ones that are nicer to each other across the board wind up having a lot more longevity and value. So even in the animal world, you're seeing ways in which just being, and I think this goes to being capable of communicating too, because kindness can be a lot of stuff. And in today's day and age, I think the easiest thing that it can be is probably just shutting your mouth and hearing someone else speak before trying to speak to them. And if their opinion isn't the one that you saw on social media, it's not the one that everyone is saying, they have a dissenting opinion on something, that what you don't need to immediately do is attack them. And also, just as true, and something that I'll harp on from time to time, if you want to see changes take place in the world, the right way to go about it is with love and kindness. And that sounded as cliche as I knew it would as I said it, and yet it is true. The best possible way to have someone hear you, to have someone be maybe caring or emotionally invested in your desires, is to give a crap about them back and to hear the things they're saying. It's the best way. I'm kumbaya-ing this moment, and I don't mean to be doing it, but it is the best way for so many of us to find maybe an alternative to a lot of the things that we see out there. But at the same time, if you feel like every opinion goes against your own, and there's just so many voices, so many television networks or whatever saying the same thing and forcing you to say it, you do have to speak. There's no world in which you have to be quiet to be kind. But kindness certainly, I think, extends itself to the way in which we do communicate when we all choose to. All right, one other scientific thing that I found tremendously interesting, and probably because in some ways maybe it disheartens us just a tad, but yeah, probably it shouldn't, and it's certainly not surprising. Money does provide you happiness. This is a study that was done over the course of several years and actually utilizing adult information from about 50,000 participants of something called the GSS, the General Social Survey. So it took place between 1972 and 2016. So this is a fairly in-depth study. It finds that people who are well off are usually quite a bit happier. And they asked all different kinds of questions. Are you happy with this? Happy with that? How's, your general life going? And to every question, people who made, and this is interesting to me, about $108,410 or higher were very happy. They were at least 5% happier than most other people. 108,410 is a very specific number. This actually flies in the face of a recent study from Princeton in 2010 that said your level of happiness went up all the way to something to the extent of, I think, $75,000 a year as far as an income. And then once you went over that amount, your happiness actually started to come back down. And the, I think, reason given at the time with Princeton was that the more money you have, the more people in your life that might look for a little bit of the cash in some ways. They might look for help because they think maybe you're capable of providing it. And then that guilt or whatever it would be and not always providing help to everyone that you know is the kind of thing that affects you. But according to this study, anyone who makes more than the newer one, the one out of California, anyone that makes more than $108,410 a year is doing pretty good. And this shouldn't be surprising. It's not surprising. I mean, I once remember someone that I spoke with who for a long time, their family was very well off, and then eventually some things changed. And the way in which they articulated it is the toys are nicer. If you wind up in a very affluent family, if you wind up in an environment where there's extra funds to spend on toys, the only real difference is that the toys, I guess, might be providing extra happiness because they're a lot fancier than some of the ones other people can get. But other than that, come on. I mean, in all honesty, if we all live our lives the right way, I think there's a certain amount of happiness we can all find. Kumbaya number 2 from Craig Collins. I am filling in on the Chad Benson Show. Got a lot of other stuff coming up throughout the show. A quick break, and then more me.
No fake outrage here, just the real thing. The Chad Benson Show.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins. I'm going to talk about something that probably not a lot of the listeners use, TikTok. TikTok is a social media app that a lot of young people are on, and apparently a lot of different groups have cropped up from this app. It's actually really good, according to a recent article in Wired.com, at grouping you into a category, whether that's the cop TikTok, the doctor TikTok. There's a bunch of ones that exist, and you will land in one of them. There is sort of a surprising, though, side piece of side piece is the wrong word, group, a smaller subset of people that exist. They're the people that are in jail. That's right. TikTok is doing great, apparently, or at least some people are in prison at highlighting the experience that is going to jail, which is just to me surreal. It's called Prison TikTok. It exists. There's some very famous people, I guess, within it. The thing that's so confusing about it, though, is in almost all scenarios, the people who are posting this stuff on the internet, they're not supposed to have phones. They are smuggling phones into their living situation in order to post on social media, to post on TikTok, and then they add the hashtag prison life. This is a real story that I found tremendously interesting just because of the existence of it. I know that in the world of podcasting, which is something that I think is a little bit more mainstream than, say, the TikTok, although I guess it depends on what demographic you are. There have been some tremendously popular shows that dealt with people either in prison or recently out of prison talking about their experience there. But maybe a part of it, and some of the things I've seen in diving into the prison life TikTok, is the wake-up call that could exist here. There is an argument in this article that there is tremendous benefit in some of the ways in which this is highlighted and featured on an app and a platform like TikTok for younger generations to understand what potentially befalls people who do things that are illegal and wind up in places like jail. Because that experience, I'm not shocking anyone when I say this, and you don't need to go to a social media app to see it, is not awesome. It is a lot less fun than maybe any human being might ever try to describe it as, or certainly a lot less fun than all the other things you see highlighted on social media. And yet this subgenre exists and continues to be an ever-growing part of the social media platform that is TikTok. By the way, that's a video mostly platform. That's not exactly like things like Facebook or Twitter that rely on all different kinds of maybe sharing. It's just all videos. And oftentimes it's just people dancing and doing silly things. But in this case, it is prisoners highlight. I can't imagine how they're not catching these people, though, in all honesty. And I don't know what the good and bad things are here. I did say a second ago that maybe a benefit is demonstrating the scary aspects that are involved in getting in trouble in a legal sense and having to do things like spend time in jail. But at the same time, like, these are people that aren't allowed to have things that are putting videos up on social media with their faces in them, which is something you see a lot of places. You see a lot of criminals caught because of the things they do online, the crimes in which they highlight. And while this maybe is being just looked away from, because I do think in some ways it's sort of harmless, it is at least a thing where people are showing off that they are skirting some of the rules that exist there. But prison TikTok is a subgenre that's been popular on social media. The world continues to amuse me in so many ways and surprise me in so many ways. I also saw this story because every day, actually, I see this story. It's just changed the players involved. An Oregon State police officer who refused to wear a mask at a coffee shop has been placed on leave. He has, in some ways, lost his job because of a confrontation, an argument that took place at a place called Allen's Coffee and Tea. It was later reported that the incident was reported to local police, prompting the state police to launch an investigation. And after investigating this situation, they decided that they had to put the officer involved on leave for his decision not to wear a mask at the time. In defense, in conversation about this, the superintendent of the Oregon State Police said, "Let me be clear, Oregon State Police troopers are not above the law, and this conduct is being immediately addressed. As the leader of the Oregon State Police, I would like to offer my apology to the coffee shop employees and the community." The only huge response I have to any stories like this is one that I think I've given before on this very show. Whether or not you're going to agree with what role the government should take in enforcing these kind of things, businesses are allowed to make any decision they want. Every business that exists in our country is allowed to throw any rule at the people who walk into the business and expect them to abide by it in order to buy the product, or they can choose not to serve them. That is a right that all businesses have. And I think the basis of any conversation as far as whether or not you need to listen to a sign or a posting or a requirement by a business to wear something, it goes beyond what mandates, what requirements exist on a government level to me. I mean, I know that legally people might differ on that part of the equation, but if this coffee shop wants everyone to wear a mask when you walk inside and they try to refuse service to a member of the community because they're not wearing one, the coffee shop's right. They're always going to be right. When you see the viral videos of someone throwing a temper tantrum at a box store because they were asked to put a mask on, the truth is the box store has every right to require it and every ability to not sell it to you. And it's okay if that doesn't make you happy. It's okay if that makes you choose to go somewhere else, if that's the decisions you want to make. In my opinion, at least it's okay to do that kind of thing, but that's the only option you have at that point. And so the fact that there was an officer that had a confrontation, a state police trooper that had a confrontation with a coffee shop, you know, no matter what side of the aisle you're on all this, and by the way, a lot of people's opinions seem to be changing on a lot of this, but the right people in this are the people that run that coffee establishment. All right, this is Craig Collins filling in. A lot more Chad Benson Show in just a bit.
The Chad Benson Show.
Independent thoughts, independent life. This is Chad Benson.
This is the Chad Benson Show. My name is Craig Collins, filling in for the day. Happy to be here. Man, John Bolton. Every so often, John Bolton says some things, and I laugh at the things John Bolton says, or the things that are in his book at times, and not just laugh because, you know, I like to laugh at bad things, because if some of that's true, it's not funny. But what is true is that a lot of the reviews of the book say there's a bunch of inconsistencies in it, and this is all over the place. So John Bolton seems to be a guy that likes to be hyperbolic at best at times, and maybe other things. But he was giving an interview to CNN, and I'd play the audio, but I don't really have time to listen to Jack Tapper as well. But he gave an interview, and during it he said, and this is, I quote, in response to being asked whether or not he told President Trump about the Russian story that's all over the place, that they offered bounties to militants to kill U.S. Military. He said, I think I have enough scars from bringing things up about Russia that he probably didn't want to hear that I can say I agree with. I think I have enough scars. Who is John Bolton? What happened to him? I mean, in all honesty, if this is accurate, if this is valuable, did he get berated at some point? Did he, leave the same way maybe a child who gets yelled at leaves a room and just couldn't get over it? I mean, this is surreal to me that you would say in response to a question like that, hey, John, you might have been responsible for telling the president about something that he's now getting criticized for quite a bit. It's almost shocking to me that he has a role in all this. And while he was the national security advisor, though, so I guess it makes tremendous sense that he does. But when John Bolton's asked that kind of question, his response is, I have enough scars. I haven't. What is going on? I thought these individuals just did jobs. I don't know if you ever left a job or got fired from a job or decided to, do anything in relation to a job you had, and you described that as scars. And if you do, I guess I'd be curious to know exactly what happened, because maybe it's up to that point. But come on, a guy like this, a guy with a political career as long as his, feels as though he couldn't emotionally handle talking about a topic with the current president. He couldn't navigate that conversation without getting another scar. Is that a real? Is this a real thing? I'm pinching myself as I continue to talk into the microphone to make sure that this is real life, and I'm not going to wake up in a second, because I just don't understand how that could be possible. Certainly someone who works in the field like the national security advisor, someone who's talking about all kinds of things as far as international security, as far as all kinds of war-related conversations or conflict-related conversations, that you can't handle a little back and forth from the president of the United States. I mean, what did he do? Did he make fun of you? Did he say you looked stupid, or said something about maybe your glasses or your shoes? I have no idea. Did he come up with a nickname, as the president is one to do? And could little Johnny Bolton not handle that? I don't know. But to me, that's obviously the kind of thing that should have been responded to with, are you serious? Of course, on CNN, that's not the way the conversation goes. Jake would sit there just nodding his head oh, yep, scars. Makes sense. He's the president. He's mean. He's a horrible person. Nobody can handle the things he says. Oh, man. I don't even know. This sounds to me to just compare it to someone who's used to being on social media and having fights that way. And the minute you have a conflict in real life, you shut down. The minute that anybody tries to argue a point, you say out loud as a person in the real world sitting next to and seeing that person, the person who's a troll on social media, who's willing to spout off and yell at everybody for being all kinds of different crazy things. The minute that person conflicts with you in real life, they're like, oh, I'm sorry, man. I'm just going to go over here and never speak again. That sounds like what a John Bolton did. Man, did he deserve to get fired. I got to be honest, as I read all that and hear that reaction, the only thing you could possibly come to, in my opinion, from that conversation is that if the guy could be deterred by having an emotional scar, then he definitely doesn't deserve the role that he was being asked to fill. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to something else that's a lot of fun. Airbnb has decided to add a restriction to people trying to rent an entire house. The reason why, if you're under the age of 25, the restriction now prevents you from renting an entire home. You can still rent other things on Airbnb, but it's because too many kids were throwing parties, which, by the way, I never really thought of that. But in the party throwing world, access to an entire home was actually usually rule number one. You had to pick it up somehow. And they said 99.95% of trips on Airbnb have no requirements, no safety restrictions whatsoever, because it's not full homes. But anybody that's going to rent an entire area, an entire spot for an evening, I guess they were having some trouble with that. And especially with the world in which it exists as far as health-related things are concerned, doing everything we can to prevent large gatherings of young people seem to make a tremendous amount of sense. So that is, for anyone out there planning on the next party going through the old Airbnb, it's not gonna work out the way you think. I also really like this story that I saw in the news. 1,000 phrases incorrectly trigger Alexa, Siri, or Google Assistant. Someone did a bunch of research. And my first question, and I got to interview one of the people that was a part of this study, but like how did you conduct this research? Did you sit there with Alexa and just say a bunch of phrases, and then every time that you said one that did something wrong, you checked it? Because that's a long amount of work. But I don't know if there's an easier way, a technology way to make it happen. Maybe there is. I guess you program a computer to just say things in that weird monotone computer voice, and then, or maybe you just have one smart device talk to another one and see what happens. I don't know. But some of the phrases, some of the words you're going to want to steer clear of, they do depend on what device you use, what smart thing you have in your home. If you have an Amazon Alexa, for example, you're going to have to steer clear from stuff like unacceptable. That is not a word you should say, because I guess it's going to trigger a false response from the old device. And I don't know if that just means it tries to ask you what you want, or if it actually says something. Maybe if you say unacceptable, Jeff Bezos' voice jumps in and says everything that I say is acceptable. I have no idea. Also, election is a word that apparently you can't use in front of Alexa. That doesn't seem weird. And a letter. A letter seems innocuous enough, but a letter is something that you can't say, or otherwise Alexa will think that you're talking to her and turn on a bunch. Google Home has problems with OK Cool, which probably they should get a fixin', because that sounds like a fairly common one. And OK Who is Reading, which to me is just funny. Siri has to struggle with things like a city, which, okay, I can see how that sounds similar. And also Hey Jerry, which to me is just kind of funny. I don't know if that's some sort of thing they programmed in because somebody doesn't like Jerry. But Hey Jerry is something you can't say around an Apple device. And then finally, Microsoft Cortana is something that I don't think a lot of us use anymore. But apparently it doesn't like Montana. That's a phrase that might, and the reason that they're even reporting this stuff is so that you know that you might have unintended privacy intrusions. Because that's really what's most interesting about it. It's not necessarily that it responds, but that your smart device kicks on based on what you're saying. So now if we go back to these words and we think about it from a world of just spying on you for a second, one of the most interesting ones to me is that Alexa can't handle the word election. I think that's interesting. And I know as I say it that I can hear a level of similarity between it. But if your device kicks on every time you talk about the word election and you want to throw the tinfoil hat on and be a bit of a conspiracy theorist, that is an interesting thing to be spying on. That's an interesting thing to accidentally have 20 to 30 seconds or more of audio of you saying words after saying the word election. I wonder as they dive deeper into this if we wind up that other words trigger things like Trump. I wonder if somehow that word, I didn't see it listed here, but I wonder if that could turn on a device and make them up. We're sorry, we thought you said something totally different. Or maybe just if you besmirch Bezos at all, you eventually wind up having your access to Amazon completely revoked. I don't know. But it is an interesting study and this also kind of demonstrates a thing that I enjoyed talking about a lot during quarantine, because one, there was hard to find things fun to talk about during quarantine, but two, we had a lot of time on our hands, and certainly scientists did. And so researchers decided that now is the right time to look at all the different words and phrases that might trigger a smart device in your home. I imagine that it was one person just sitting there every single day, word after word, being like, well, good day of research today. Wake up and do this all over again tomorrow because nothing else to do. Oh, and real quick, here's a PSA for everybody out there. And it is a serious one. It is not necessarily as silly as it might sound when I say it out loud, because I get it if when you hear this sentence, you're like, well, who would do that? But sadly, people are going to do it. If you use hand sanitizer a lot, which we're all told to do not handle fireworks. That is a PSA out there in the world. Do not use hand sanitizer and then handle and or light a firework, because the thing you just put on your hands that you rubbed on them is very flammable. So you'd want to do everything you can to stay away from the fireworks situation, while also keeping sure that you're clean and up to date as far as getting any kind of germs off the old hands. So that is a very earnest, very honest PSA that obviously every so often people might react to, well, that's something we didn't need to be told. But yeah, no, we definitely did. And the amount of people, sadly, that will injure themselves while celebrating a very important holiday in our country is already high enough, and certainly one we don't want to make any worse. But hand sanitizer can be a very bad part of that equation. All right, this is Craig Collins. I'm filling in on the Chad Benson Show. One more segment. Looking forward to talk to you in just a bit.
You go, boy.
This isn't about right or left. This is just about right and wrong.
Right you are, Chad. The Chad Benson Show.
This is Craig Collins filling in on the Chad Benson Show. Thrilled to be hanging out with you on a day just before the 4th of July holiday. It is going to be a fun time, obviously. The president will be celebrating the 4th of July holiday by going to Mount Rushmore and enjoying some fireworks, which has caused a lot of opinions, but also probably should be a highlight of how our country was born, of course. And obviously, as you talk about then the world in which people react to all kinds of things, you start to think about well, I don't know if you all do, but campus reform certainly does. Think about the opinions of younger people and what they say, what they think about all kinds of issues. At times, this winds up being fairly funny audio content, because some of the questions asked and some of the misses as far as the answers given may make us all think that school needs to be improved just a tad. But here we go. Here is campus reform interviewing kids. I think this is on a beach in California, about some of the thoughts they have related to the 4th of July.
All right, so the 4th of July is coming up. There are a lot of protests that have been going on around the country. What do you think the legacy of our country is? Do you guys think we're a racist country?
There is a little bit of racism, but I feel like it's more like with the police. You feel me?
America was built off of slavery and all of that.
Our country most definitely has a bad legacy. I think it's pretty obvious with the president that we have right now.
I have to agree, but obviously there's people in America that aren't racist, but there is racism in this country.
White people take for granted, they think they're entitled, but they're not. Like, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, but they take it to an extreme that they're like the supreme race.
Racism has been has been around for quite a while. Like,
black people basically made this country. They were slaves for a long time.
So with the 4th of July coming up, we're going to...
So there you go. That's the answer to the first question. Does racism exist in our country? Happy 4th of July. And then they transition into campus reform does just basic questions about what the 4th of July is.
Ask a couple questions. My first question for you guys is, what does the 4th of July commemorate?
Uh-oh.
Day we declared independence from Great Britain.
There you go.
Basically America's birthday, right?
I think independence.
What year did we declare our independence?
I'm going to be real with you. I don't know.
1967, I'll say.
Close, a little off.
I don't know, 1859.
1964.
I'm going to give you a try. What do you think? What year did we get our independence?
1970-something, 74, something like that.
1979.
1979.
Like 1800s.
1864.
Oh. Okay, I can't do anymore. See, now, look, every time you want to take somebody's opinion, no matter what the topic is, you want to take it, you want to respect it. You hope that they can answer a question like what year the country was born with a little bit more accuracy than 1970-something. 1970-something would be just a tad off, as we are all concerned. And I do enjoy a campus reform video from time to time. If you've never seen one, never heard one before, they do ask some fairly simple questions after diving into the heart of what a lot of young people certainly will say and repeat one after another. And then you just ask them a little bit easier of a question sometimes, and they they don't have quite as candid a response as they're expected to have. I saw this in the news, shifting gears as much as I can after a segment like that. Mike Tyson said that while filming the Hangover movie, if you don't know what that is, it's a comedy movie, and it's probably a very bro-friendly movie. But I like The Hangover, by the way. Mike Tyson appears in that. He said he was drunk and high while filming The Hangover, which I think you can kind of tell. If you dive back into the audio and look at the experience that it was having Mike Tyson and a tiger share the movie screen at the same time, I guess the things going on there were exactly what the film was looking for. And if you're Mike Tyson, by the way, and you read that script about guys going to Vegas and getting hammered and losing one of their friends, maybe you think that to be in character, you gotta dive into a lot of that stuff. I just like the fact that these kind of interviews happen and that a 54-year-old former heavyweight legend is willing to answer them as honestly as he did. It actually also reminds me of David Wells, the Yankee pitcher who admitted that when he pitched a perfect game, he was drunk. That is just the kind of thing that, man, I wonder if maybe there's some sort of secret sauce for some people in some of these sort of things that make them, because Tyson's funny in the movie. I think he was well reviewed, and apparently he did that very much out of his current state of mind. The sound, way of thinking that most of us would expect for playing a role in a movie, which is, I think, the first time Tyson was ever asked to do it, and that was the road he went down. One last thing, and this is an update to something I talked about earlier on in the show. The Redskins are undergoing a thorough review of their name. This is after a push from FedEx, which owns the rights to the stadium, and other individuals, including Nike, by pulling products off of their website, have asked for a review of the team's name and maybe a potential change to it. This review formalizes the initial discussions the team has been having with the league in recent weeks, is a quote from the organization. This process allows the team to take into account not only the proud tradition and history of the franchise, but also input from our alumni, the organization, sponsors, the National Football League, and local community it is proud to represent on and off the field. This is a conversation that I guess has long been desired by some and long been sort of resisted by the Washington Redskins team, and one that I don't know. I mean, I guess I'll ask you this, and this is not necessarily to ask anyone's opinion on what's the right and wrong decision here, but what would you like to see the Redskins be renamed? What would your Washington football team be called if you wanted to call them one? And obviously, in doing that, I think the only thing that really makes everybody happy is a name that offends absolutely no one. The right response in changing a name, and certainly one where there was a push to get it changed, is to find a name that's just completely has no ability to make any person on the planet upset, which is a challenge. That's a tough request. I'm trying to think in my own brain of examples of things that you could call the Washington team that would make sure that anyone and everyone does not react in any kind of way negative to it. Maybe the Washington Apples. Maybe you just go with it's not exactly a frightening name. It's not exactly the kind of name that throws the heart of, scares the heart of the competitor. But at the same time, it might be a name that certainly offends no one. The Washington people. The Washington, help me out here. Go to our social media pages, Chad Benson Show on Facebook, Twitter, all the different places you can find it. You can also find my page, The Craig Collins Show on Facebook. And just let me know if you had to rename this sports franchise or anyone, and you had to come up with a name that is as safe as humanly possible in the day and age in which we live, what do you call them? You don't let a Mike Tyson name the team, that's for sure. Mike Tyson is a person who doesn't seem to be able to do a lot very well, as I just mentioned a second ago, so I think he would be out. Unless you call him the Washington Mike Tysons. That might be an interesting move, because that is a scary name. That's a name that might make a lot of people very afraid, and maybe Iron Mike would really love it. So maybe that's the goal. Maybe that's the road you go down. A happy 4th of July to everyone out there. Celebrate safely. Do things like, not use hand sanitizer if you're going to handle fireworks of any kind. Enjoy and celebrate the independence of our country, and do it in the way in which you feel safe, the way in which you feel proud to do it. And don't worry if people around you seem to think that it's a country that you should not be proud of, because it's one you absolutely need and should be proud of on a daily basis. And to the President of the United States, who celebrates this holiday at Mount Rushmore, I think that's awesome. I think that the firework display is going to be great there. Firework displays throughout the country are probably going to be great in a lot of places. In D.C., going to be one of the biggest ever. And I think they're even giving away masks. So please, everyone out there, stay as safe as possible. Enjoy a wonderful holiday. And drink a beer for me.
The Chad Benson Show.